Hey, I'm Allison from Learning at the Primary Pond. I'm a literacy specialist, and in this video, I'm going to explain some of the ins and outs of sentence structure. We're not going to get too technical, but I will share some terms with you and also explain why explicit instruction is so important for students and what that looks like on a primary grades level, right? When the kids are just learning how to write. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, make sure to do that now, and then also hit the little bell so that you're notified every time I post a brand new video about teaching literacy in K2. Okay, so I'd like to start with a question for you. First and foremost, do you have or have you worked with students in the past who either write in run-on sentences that never end or incomplete sentences, sentence fragments that they look like a complete sentence, like they got a capital letter and a period, but they're actually not a complete sentence when you read them? If you've ever dealt with this with your students, write either run-on or incomplete in the comments, or you can write both, because I know I personally have had different students that tend to do both. Now, this is actually pretty natural that our kids would write in run-on sentences or incomplete sentences, because written language, right, is talk written down. However, when we talk, it is pretty natural for us to speak in run-on sentences that are kind of long, right? Like if you listen to this video, probably have got lots of run-on sentences in here. And then same thing goes for sentence fragments. Sometimes we're not speaking in complete sentences. So when kids hear that and speak that way themselves, then when they go to write it down, they're, especially young kids, we're talking mostly about primary here, but I would say beyond primary too, these problems persist. They're not yet familiar enough with the ins and outs of written language to be able to consistently say, oh, like this might be what I would say when I'm talking, but this is how we write it correctly. So it's totally normal for them to be writing like this. The challenge for us is just how do we take that this is where they're at and bring them to the point where they're writing complete sentences and they're strong sentences and they're not run-on sentences, right? That's the challenge that we're really going to dig into here today. Okay, so we're going to start by going over some terms, and these terms are really for your knowledge. You may introduce some of them like, later in first grade or second grade, but for the most part, this is for your awareness. The one thing that I do feel is really helpful to teach students is the concept of subject and predicate. Subject is what a sentence is about, and then a predicate is like basically what's happening in the sentence. And so we know that if we've got a subject and a predicate, then we have a complete sentence. And actually, if we've just got a subject and a predicate, it totally makes sense on its own. Then what we have is an independent clause here. It can stand by itself. So that's a complete sentence. However, we also have dependent clauses, and sometimes our students write those as sentences, but they're not. They may also include a subject and a predicate, but they can't stand by itself. So for example, the phrase, because her car was broken. It's not, a complete sentence. Our students might try to make it a sentence, but it's not, right? It's got a subject and a predicate, but it's not a complete sentence. It has to be like within, put with an independent clause. Now, another important sentence part is a conjunction. So this is just like a connecting piece, or sometimes, combining words. So and, or, after, because, not only, but also. So lots of different types of conjunctions, but they're just, combining sentence parts together. So now let's move on to sentence types. And I promise this will, again, be helpful for you, even if you're not necessarily like directly teaching your students these terms. But a simple sentence is when we've got an independent clause that is used as a sentence, right? And sometimes a conjunction could be in there as well. It doesn't have to be, but it could be. So for example, I like to bake cookies, or I like to bake cookies and cupcakes. That's a simple sentence. Even though there's a conjunction, it's just, we've got one independent clause. Now, a compound sentence would be when at least two independent clauses are in there. So my brother enjoys playing soccer and I prefer to play baseball. We've got two independent clauses, right? We've got that my brother enjoys playing soccer and then I prefer to play baseball. So two independent clauses going on in a compound sentence. Then we have a complex sentence, which is made up of an independent clause and a dependent clause. So here's an example. Our dog likes playing with a tennis ball, but not a frisbee. got the independent clause and the dependent clause. And then last but not least, a compound complex sentence. That is a compound sentence and a complex sentence together. Lots to think about. But again, you don't necessarily need to introduce this stuff to your students depending on how old they are. Obviously, if you teach older students, yeah, go for it. But as long as you're aware of these things, and also you're aware that our goal is to get them to, at least in primary, like write simple sentences using those independent clauses, right? And then that's the baseline. And then in primary, if we can also get them to write compound sentences, that's a good thing to push them into, but that's probably not, later into first grade, second grade and up. So let's talk about sentence structure activities that are really good for developing their sense of this stuff and their ability to write incomplete sentences that aren't run-ons or fragment. So let's start with, where did I put it? Sentence scrambles. So, okay, here's an example. It's a first grade example. This would look a little bit different for kindergarten. And then I have sentence scrambles for second grade that actually have 2 sentences per page. But basically what they're doing is they're reading the words and then they are gluing them down here to put them in order. And then they're writing the sentence. And then there's actually a little challenge here too, where it says what comes next. Imagine that the sentence above is in a book. On the back of this paper, write a sentence to come after this one. So it's like a little bit of an extra add-on challenge, but putting the words in order is good for sentence structure practice. And then you're reinforcing it because they copy the sentence. That's a good one. Run-on sentences, you could give your kids like a little stop sign. You could just print something out if you don't actually have little stop signs. And you can say or write a run-on sentence and then they hold up the stop sign when the sentence needs to stop. You could also do finish the fragment sentence where you give students like part of a sentence. For example, when we went on an airplane, point out, hey, this is not a complete sentence, and then the kids fill in the rest. So again, this is where our knowledge of dependent clauses comes in, that like, okay, if we're aware our students are writing in lots of dependent clauses, we need to show them some dependent clause examples and then have them help us finish it. Sentence cut-aparts are good too, where students say a sentence or you could do this different ways, but basically there's a sentence and either you write it, you could do it on a sentence strip, that's always fun. And then either they cut it apart or you cut it apart and then you mix up the words and then they have to put it back together. Color coding is good too. This is really good for visual learners, but I think most of us learn visually in some way or another. This helps them distinguish between subject and predicate though. If you give them a sentence and then they highlight the subject in one color and the predicate in another, they could even do this in their own writing. If you're like, hey, the sentence is not complete, I want you to highlight and see if you can find the subject and predicate. If they know those terms and you've taught them what that means, they should be able to notice, oh, this doesn't have a subject or doesn't have a predicate, and then hopefully fix it up. So subject and predicate are super helpful for the kids to actually know. And then I think, I would say once you get to the point where you're teaching kids, here's how we can like expand a sentence or make a compound sentence, then it becomes productive to teach them just the definitions of simple and compound sentences. All right, so sentence scrambles, I'm gonna include a link for these. At the time that I'm recording this, I don't know how many seasons are out, but eventually there's gonna be spring, summer, fall, winter, all 4 seasons for kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. Great way to work on sentence structure. Also a good way to work on meaningful handwriting practice because they're practicing neat handwriting. So I will include the link for those with this video. Hope this was helpful. Appreciate you watching. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.